an official debate happening. We have Azgerod, we have Spaz. Azgerod's taken the position that there is insufficient justification to believe that Rainbow Dash, the unicorn god, does not exist. Spaz is taking the opposition. We're going to be based upon who concedes. We don't get a vocal concession from either participant. We'll put it to a voting poll in which you, the audience, can decide on who you think performed better overall in the debate. No time limit, no moderation. You guys can get started.
Okay, so yeah, my default position, I have divine inspiration for believing in Rainbow Dash, and I think that it's unlikely that you have any good justification for believing that Rainbow Dash, the Rainbow God, doesn't exist. Let's hear your argument.
Okay, so just to reiterate, Rainbow Dash is an entity named Rainbow Dash, at least, that's said to have created the material universe, right?
Correct.
And you say that you have some reason to believe in an entity that created the material universe.
Yeah.
Well, so you have some reason to believe in Rainbow Dash.
Yeah.
And you would probably agree that the idea that Rainbow Dash created the universe is contradictory with the idea that Odin created the universe, Zeus created the universe, God created the universe, any version of, well, basically no other creator deity could have created the universe.
Correct.
And so what I'm going to say is, to the extent that you think you have justification to believe that Rainbow Dash created the universe, you must think that you have justification to think that none of those other deities did create the universe, right?
Well, my justification for believing that those deities didn't create the universe is that...
No. So all I'm saying, you think you have justification for A contradicts B. Therefore, you have justification to believe not B, right?
Yeah.
So you have justification to believe that, for instance, the Christian God doesn't exist, the Muslim God doesn't exist, no pagan deity exists.
Correct.
And would you agree that the reference class of, say, people who think they have divine inspiration, well, do you think in general having divine inspiration is good reason to believe something exists?
It's enough for me.
Okay, it's enough for you. You think it would probably be enough for someone else too, right? Do you think in general, for someone to have divine inspiration, that means they have good reason to believe that their deity exists?
No.
Okay, no. So do you have any... Sorry. Go ahead.
So there's a unique characteristic to the way in which Rainbow Dash communicates with me. And I can't quite describe it to you, but it is there. And it is such that it proves in its own nature that the communication is accurate, and that things that Rainbow Dash tells me are indeed true. And I do not grant that any other false prophet would have a similar experience. I don't believe them. They're lying.
Okay, but so obviously the character of that communication is only accessible to you.
Yeah.
And obviously you would probably agree that prophets of other deities would make similar claims.
They'd be wrong.
That's something kind of similar to what C.S. Lewis says about the Christian God communicating with humans.
But they'd be wrong. They wouldn't have that kind of communication. I don't believe.
Okay, sorry. But so surely you would agree that, at least from the perspective of an outside observer, the situation is just symmetrical. Like, you say you have unique communication, Christians say it, Muslims say it, everybody says that.
Yeah, I don't know that there's any good reason for anybody to believe.
You're not trying to claim from the perspective of any outside observer that your communication has any more weight to it than anyone else's. Right?
One sec. I believe that when I speak the truths of Rainbow Dash to an outsider, that they can feel and their soul recognizes the truth of my words. And I believe that anyone who claims that they do not know the difference between me and one of the false prophets or the difference between Rainbow Dash and one of the false gods would be lying, and they would be lying to themselves to avoid the punishment of Rainbow Dash. All right.
Okay, so are you going to include that as one of the characteristics of Rainbow Dash, that the prophet or the words of the prophet are understood by anyone who hear it, or accepted by anyone who hear it? Okay.
Yes.
So then, obviously, if there's somebody who hears the words of the prophet and rejects Rainbow Dash after that, then that would disprove Rainbow Dash existing.
If they believe, if they actually don't believe.
Okay. So
it, yeah.
if even a single person in the universe sincerely does not see any truth to the Rainbow Dash thing, then the Rainbow Dash thing is false.
Correct.
Okay. So then obviously if I hear you talk and I don't have this sensation, then from my perspective, I've proven Rainbow Dash doesn't exist.
Well,
so there is sufficient reason. There is sufficient reason,
if
at
you
least from my subjective perspective, to think that Rainbow Dash doesn't exist.
I don't believe you. I don't believe that you have that sensation.
So you don't necessarily have to believe me, because the debate proposition is whether there exists any sufficient reason at all. So it doesn't have to be for you. It could be inaccessible to you.
But I don't believe there is sufficient reason, because I don't believe that you're having that sensation, and that's the only way that there would be such sufficient reason.
Okay. Is there any particular reason why you don't believe that? Well, wait. Because, so technically, I can take this another route. So
because Rainbow Dash has told me it's impossible, and I believe Rainbow Dash.
So from the perspective of anyone who was listening to the debate, if they didn't have that sensation, they would also know correctly that Rainbow Dash doesn't exist. So technically, it's not only just accessible. Well, it's not just like, it's a situation where every single person who hears this conversation would know one way or the other whether Rainbow Dash exists. And there would be zero room for doubt at all.
I think people can deceive themselves in amazing ways. And it's possible that their subconscious, their true subconscious mind does recognize the truth. Their soul recognizes the truth. But in today's society, a person's soul is often the truth that their soul speaks unto them is often clouded and obscured, and one is not always aware of the truths known by their own soul.
Okay, so the original claim you made was that Rainbow Dash, whenever the prophet of Rainbow Dash speaks to an outsider, they will necessarily know the words of the prophet to be true, which that would obviously contradict anyone having the perspective of not believing the prophet.
I said their soul knows. I didn't.
Originally, I want to be clear, you did originally agree that any single person hearing what you say and not agreeing with it was complete disproof that Rainbow Dash exists.
Don't twist my words.
Okay. So there has to be some degree of just like subconscious belief.
It's the soul.
Rainbow Dash. But then what that does is that gets us back to the point of symmetry with like Christianity, Islam, other religions, right? Because obviously they could say the same thing. Like a Christian could say, oh, if you are like that's something Darth Dawkins says, I think. There's something, I don't know if C.S. Lewis says this, but it's not that uncommon of a belief that like everybody knows God exists in their heart.
That's right. So
it just comes back to the same point of, from an outside observer, there's no decision criteria to tell which God exists. Like
the only way would be to like somehow know what is in your soul and figure that out. Right?
Okay, so the situation is, you are making a claim that is mutually contradictory with other claims, and there's no way of determining which one is true, right?
Correct.
Okay. And so I could plausibly say, since you seem to just be in the reference class of people who claim to have some form of divine revelation, there's not going to be anything that sets you apart from any of the people who also claim to have reason to believe in their God. At least from the perspective of an outside observer who doesn't know that their soul knows that any particular religion is true.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if I just wanted to say we have valid reason to disbelieve in Rainbow Dash because all the evidence we have in favor of Rainbow Dash, which is just a particular prophet, exists, well, times about 1 million in favor of like at least 6 different contradictory belief systems, then the maximum rate or the maximum credence that we could assign this idea that Rainbow Dash exists is probably about 1 in 1 million, right?
Sure.
Okay. So we're at the point of about, say, a justified belief. I might make that a little bit stronger, since apparently there have been about 100 million people that have existed, or 100 billion people that have existed. So it's got to be at least in the several billions of people who have claimed some kind of divine revelation. So our justified credence in the Rainbow Dash idea is going to be at most 1 in, I'll say, 6 billion.
I'll grant that.
Okay, so 1 in 6 billion. Do you think 1 in 6 billion likelihood is not justified reason to disbelieve in something?
Correct. It's like in that circumstance, you should be agnostic.
What's your definition of agnostic?
Like not knowing whether or not a proposition is true or false.
Okay, so is there any
Not, so you wouldn't
proposition?
have a position.
Sorry, is there any proposition that you're not agnostic about? Or do you think we're just agnostic to all propositions?
I believe that I am not agnostic towards the proposition A equals A, therefore B equals B. Okay.
A
So-
equals A, therefore B equals B.
So the belief is B equals B, and I'm saying that it's justified by A being equal to A, and I'm saying that B equals B is a proposition I am not agnostic towards. I believe it's true.
Okay, cool. So you're agnostic or you're not agnostic towards these sorts of like super basic propositions.
Yeah,
Like
I'm
you
not
assign
agnostic.
that 100%. How do you think you came to believe that there was a 100% probability that that was true?
Through the divine revelation of Rainbow Dash.
Okay. So do you think there's any position not related to the Rainbow Dash thing that you're not agnostic about?
No.
So do you think there's any way other than divine revelation to be non-agnostic about any proposition?
No.
Okay. So I think it's fair to say that the concept of agnosticism is just kind of meaningless in that sense, right? Like you're going to be agnostic towards everything.
No, there's a very important delimiter here, which is relation to the divine word of Rainbow Dash, which is a pretty fundamental part of the universe, seeing that Rainbow Dash created everything. Right? So there's a lot of statements, a lot of information which one could not be agnostic towards. So it's meaningful.
But so like say in science, when people use like the P is less than 0.0 or 0.05 standard, would you say that they're wrong for not being agnostic about all the results that they have? Or like when people try to ascertain truth with statistics, are they always wrong because they're not just continually agnostic?
All right, yes.
Okay, so you can be non-agnostic. Oh wait, so they are. So
They're
all
wrong.
attempt to gain truth from statistics is just like faulty.
Correct. It's an unjustified belief. It's like, sure, it's a good way of coming to the probabilities of statements, but that's as far as you should go. You shouldn't go from there is a 0.05% chance of this occurring to it will not occur.
Okay.
It's a non sequitur.
So then let's say every reason we have to believe that we can ascertain truth from statistics, just using the same logic we used earlier, is going to be evidence that we should disbelieve in Rainbow Dash.
No.
Are you sure?
I don't see why.
So what I'm saying, your argument hinges on the idea that we can't ascertain truth from statistics, right?
That's not an integral aspect of Rainbow Dash. That's just me making my claims about knowledge.
Sorry. So the argument that you're making hinges on the idea that we can't ascertain truth from statistics. Like if we could do it, then my argument would go through, and we would have valid reason not to believe in Rainbow Dash.
Well, maybe, but that wouldn't mean that Rainbow Dash doesn't exist.
Okay, well, I mean, we would have good reason. All I'm saying is we would have good reason to disbelieve.
Sure.
So, like in terms of statistics, one of the things that we determine via statistics is whether like medicine is safe.
Yeah.
So the sense in which we can't know whether Rainbow Dash exists or not is the same sense in which we can't know whether the medicine you take is going to kill you.
Yes.
Okay, yes. So we can't, but you also, for your argument to make sense, you have to endorse the idea that like we can't know anything about demographic data. We can't know anything about whether medicine kills you or helps you. We can't know anything about like say, well, we can't know anything about probabilities. We can't know anything about like popular opinion. We can't know anything about economics. All that follows.
Yeah, like you can have like some beliefs about the probabilities of things, but you can't have like absolute certainty or any kind of like knowledge justified reason to believe it.
Well, what do you think is justification?
Well, as I've implied, it has to be revelation by Rainbow Dash.
Okay, so you're saying that by your standard, the only thing like so the proposition was like there's not justified reason to disbelieve in Rainbow Dash. And what you're saying is the only thing that would grant you justified reason to believe anything would be revelation from Rainbow Dash.
Yes.
So, I mean, on the one hand, it's kind of circular. But let's say hypothetically, I could go down another route of argument and say that somebody who receives revelation from Rainbow Dash puts themselves in a reference class where they should be less likely to believe that any of their reasoning is sound or sane.
Pardon?
Oh, I mean, people who receive revelation from beings that are otherwise considered to be cartoon characters would probably
Mhm.
be like less credible in general than most others, right?
Certainly not.
Okay. Well, so do you think someone who claims to have revelation from like Yu-Gi-Oh, would you consider that person?
What an insulting comparison.
Okay, well, it might be insulting, but would you consider that person to be more credible or less credible?
Neither. Equally credible.
Equally credible. Okay. Okay. All right. So just
Wait,
to
so I
reiterate,
just want to address something here. So you're saying that like it's a relatively reasonable statement that if something has like a low probability of occurring, then you can conclude that it's false, right? Like that's like
yeah.
the general, right? So like let's talk about like what's the probability that science like that reality um is exactly the way that we think it is. There's or not exactly the way we think it is, but like let's say the probability that there's a sun which we are orbiting around. Okay. Well, I can imagine infinitely many alternate worlds where, in fact, there's not a sun which we're orbiting around, but there is something else that we're orbiting around. And so the probability, by your kind of formulation of probability, would be one in infinity. So there's a 0% chance. That's like by calculus, that's like just false.
Okay, wait.
Yeah.
I wasn't tracking. Can you repeat that?
So your argument for for there being like the probability for it having a low probability of for there being for the Rainbow Dash claim having a low probability of truth is that there are alternate claims that are contradictory to it, right? And so what you do is you take 1 divided by the number of contradictory claims, and that's the probability of that claim occurring, right? And so by the same thing, I can say the probability of the sun of us orbiting around the sun is like 1 in infinity because there are like infinitely many alternative contradictory claims that I can make.
Okay, so I was talking about contradictory claims that have equal amounts of evidence. And just using the same logic, you could say that there's an infinite number of universes where we are traveling around the sun in some kind of like a slightly different way. And so it just comes all the way back to the same. Because we would believe in the idea that we're traveling around the sun for the same reasons we always do, just weighing the evidence.
So my point is that if we didn't have knowledge about the sun, right? Like, let's say we were just back in the days when we back in the days when we were just like chilling in the or even maybe we could do the one about it's contradictory that the belief that we are that the sun is orbiting around us is also contradictory to the belief that we are orbiting around the sun, right? So if we go back to the days when everybody thought that the sun revolved around us, then at that point the claim we revolve around the sun also had an infinite number of contradictory alternatives, and we
Okay,
didn't have any.
well, just to be clear, not infinite. It would just be the number of counterclaims that are equally credible.
Yeah, but because we didn't have any information about like the sun, right? We just saw like a big ball of light. So I can say there's a ball of light, but inside it is this core of like um, uh, platinum or something, or inside there's a unicorn, or inside there's a cat or something. And then what we've got is equally plausible claims, right? So you can have there's infinitely many plausible claims in the circumstance where you're just a person sitting on the earth back in the medieval days looking up at the sun. And so by that, those people at the time would have, under your logic, concluded that we did not revolve around the sun as we understand it, right? Somebody would have claimed that,
Yeah,
and they would have
so
said,
just, sorry.
they would have said it's impossible. It's like it has such a low probability that like we should discard that, right? And conclude that it's false. Whereas I would say there may be it may not be justified to believe that it's true, right? But that doesn't mean it's false, right? Similarly, just because there's all these alternative claims, it may be unjustified to believe that Rainbow Dash, the pony god, does exist, but that doesn't mean that we have conclusive evidence that the pony god does not exist.
Okay, so I'm not going to accept the sun metaphor as being a valid metaphor to this. Because, well, actually, if we're going to talk about a situation where we don't know anything about the sun, it would actually be kind of foolish to go around believing things about the sun like the earth revolves around it with no evidence at all. Like, presumably, you would want some.
Agreed.
But let's say that it just like the only reason here to believe that it's false is just that it directly contradicts something else that's in this case more well it directly
That doesn't
contradicts.
work.
How does it not work?
So you're saying we can conclude that something's false if it's equally probable with things that are contradictory to it, right? But the trouble is
No,
that
not equally, it has to be like less probable.
less probable than things which
Well,
are
we wouldn't believe
contradictory.
something is false just because it's equally probable as something that contradicts it. That's like we
Okay,
would have
so
to
let's say
believe it's
we
false
go
other
back in
times.
time. We go back in time to the medieval days. We're looking up at the sun, and there's like twice as many theories about the sun having a cat in it, but it's like different kinds of cats
Okay,
as
so you
opposed
think
to the ones
obviously
that
you
have.
think it would be good to say it's false to believe there's a cat inside the sun, right?
Pardon?
Do you think it's good to say that it's false that there's a cat inside the sun?
Maybe now, based on our current information, yes, but not back in the day.
So just the idea that there's a random sun and there's a cat inside it, you wouldn't feel confident saying that's false?
Well, actually, now that I think about it, maybe just because the cat would burn. But we're talking about a cat, an eternal cat with a force field around it. So no, yeah, I wouldn't say that's
Okay.
false.
Well, that's not even really equivalent because that doesn't contradict other theories.
Well,
Like
it does
if
contradict
I
other
say
theories.
I have good reason to believe that there's a cat based on divine revelation, and then there's literally billions of other people saying, well, we have good reason to believe not a cat based on divine revelation,
There,
and
there,
they're all equally
it does
credible.
sort of it does sort of contradict it because our consumption of the sun, um, like it's not about whether or not it contradicts current evidence, right? Because my pony god doesn't contradict current evidence or current things that we have.
It technically does contradict current evidence, because we
Right,
have
it
current
contradicts.
evidence of divine revelation that contradicts the pony god. And the only reason we had for being able to believe in the pony god at all was divine revelation.
So the point is that, like, you can't just conclude that because you don't have, like, I would agree that we don't have any good reason to believe, or that you don't have any good reason to believe in the pony god. I would agree you don't have any reason to believe in the Christian god or any other god. But that doesn't mean you can conclude that it's false, because any one of those possibilities might be true, and you can't just conclude that they're all false. It's unreasonable to do so, right?
I think it depends on, sorry.
Like, when you said, like, the probability is formed by looking at all, by saying, like, 1 divided by the number of contradictory claims that are equal in probability to it, or something like that, whatever, right? That's not really how probability works, right? Or if it is, it's not a good way to come to a truth claim about something, because, like, as I say, you can do that with just about anything that you don't have knowledge of yet. Like, like, as I say, like, 200 years ago, when we didn't have information about, like, maybe 200 years ago isn't right, 500 years ago, when we didn't have information about electrons, infinitely many people may have come to different theories, and perhaps they would even say it's inspired by divine revelation about the nature of, like, the little things that may or may not orbit like atoms, right? And one of them was, let's say, electrons, and you would conclude that that was false because it was contradictory to all these other hypotheses about that thing that none of us have any knowledge of, right? But that doesn't mean it was false. Clearly, it's true.
Okay, so let me walk that back a little bit. I'm actually not committed to saying that divine revelation is good evidence. We could say that, oh, divine revelation is just like absolutely terrible evidence. But if we say that, then we're just back to agnosticism. And this is actually even worse for you, because we're
Right.
back to agnosticism about
Let's say
all
let's say
possible
divine
gods, treating them all as being equal.
yeah,
And obviously there's going to be an infinite number of possible gods. So it's like you said, literally 1 over infinity, that this
that's okay.
particular one would be the true.
But my point is that 1 over infinity, quote unquote, probability formulated the way that you're formulating it doesn't imply falsity. It just means that, like, there's a million other equally probable ways that it could be. And that's true about, like, any claim that we don't have knowledge about. But there's still a fact of the matter about those things that we don't have knowledge about. We just don't know what it is yet. But if we discard all of the possibilities because they're equally probable to the other things, to the other possibilities, then you've disregarded all possibilities. But that's clearly false. There is something that's true.
Okay, sure. But what I'm saying is, to the extent that we have reason to believe something contradictory, that's the extent to which we have reason to believe that whatever theory is false. So it's not necessarily, oh, just because it might not be true. What I'm saying is, say, to the extent we have reason to believe that the sun revolves around the earth, obviously we have reason to believe that the earth doesn't revolve around the sun.
True.
So to the extent we have reason to believe that, say, any other god exists, we have reason
Yeah.
to believe that Rainbow Dash doesn't exist.
Correct.
So if you want to say, oh, we have no reason to believe, well, yeah, if you want to say we have no reason to believe Rainbow Dash exists at all, then you could say, okay, well, we're just going to be agnostic about whether any deity exists.
Well,
But that's
personally,
technically not the claim you were making at the start, which was one of divine revelation.
no, I mean, the claim I'm making at the start is that there's no good reason to disbelieve the existence of Rainbow Dash, and I would actually hold that for all gods.
Okay, so your view, which technically, I mean, I know it's a meme, but like you're technically walking back from the original view.
What was I? How?
Well, what was the original view, that you are the prophet of Rainbow Dash?
Yeah, well, I personally, like me personally, I have this divine revelation from Rainbow Dash, but I'm just talking, like, from the audience's perspective, right? Like, the audience doesn't have any good reason to believe in Rainbow Dash, nor does the audience have any good reason to believe in the Christian God, and so there's no good reason to believe that Rainbow Dash doesn't exist.
Okay. The only thing I'm saying is that since we have, like, I mean, like you already agreed, every reason that we have for believing that the Christian God exists is a reason for believing that Rainbow Dash doesn't exist.
Well, I agree with that.
So if you want to start from the idea that we can possibly have good reasons for believing that Rainbow Dash exists, then we're also going to have fairly good reasons to believe she doesn't.
I don't believe that that the audience members and you have any good reason to believe that Rainbow Dash does exist, nor do I. So, like, I don't think you guys have any good reason to believe in any other god.
Well, technically, you said that we do have good reason to believe she does or doesn't exist based on like introspection, right?
No. It's unattainable introspection because it's within your soul, and you guys can't access your souls because you're all heathen.
So it's unattainable introspection.
Yeah, there's no introspection. You can't do it because it's
Okay.
within your soul. Yeah.
So is it just unattainable to heathens, or is it unattainable to everyone?
It's unattainable until you attain it.
Okay. All right. So your view, I guess, is just that we have no reason to believe that any god does exist or doesn't exist.
Correct.
And do you not think that, like, say, historical testimony? Okay, let me try to lay out exactly what I'm trying to say. So let's say we live in a universe, obviously. It's possible that it was created by a god, it's possible that it wasn't. So whatever probability mass, if you want to think of it this way, that there is that we were created by a god, that's going to be divided between possible gods.
Yeah.
So when I talk about evaluating the Christian God, Muslim God, whatever, versus Rainbow Dash, we have to start from a perspective of theism. Because if we weren't doing that, we would believe Rainbow Dash doesn't exist anyway.
Well, you don't have to start from a position of theism. No. You just can't start from an assumption of positive atheism.
What I'm trying to say is that if we're trying to evaluate which God there is, then presumably we're not worried about the idea that there isn't a God.
No, you are. Yeah.
We are. Right. So the line that
There
I'm
may be
going to
no
take
God, or there may be
is that
any.
if there is a God, it's fairly likely. I mean, assuming there is a God that communicates with humans at all, which you also endorse that, right? There is a God, the God communicates with humans somehow.
It just communicates with me.
Okay. But what I'm saying is the general reference class of theories about gods that communicate with humans. If that's true at all, then we're going to have pretty good reason to endorse sort of like gods that have like reliable historical, or not necessarily reliable, but like some degree of historical testimony.
I don't think that's remotely justified. Like, I don't think
so.
No, I don't think God's real because like the Bible says so, or because like no.
Oh no, we're not talking about God's real. We're talking about if there is a God
Mhm.
who communicates with humans, we would be more likely to think. If we're trying to decide which God that is, we would be more likely to come to the conclusion that God who has sort of more reliable, more consistent communications with people over time is the true God.
No, not at all.
You don't
Like,
think so?
no, that God would be like if that God was the God, then there would be more opportunities for obtaining evidence about their existence, but they're not more probable to exist than any other God.
Oh yeah. So they're not necessarily more probable to exist, but we have more reason to believe they exist because we've had more
We
evidence.
may or may
So we're more able to obtain evidence, and we also have obtained that evidence. That's the situation.
If we have obtained the evidence, then
Which we have, because I'm talking about gods that have like religious communities that have existed for thousands of years.
I don't grant that those are like at all good justifications. Like just because people like say that they like people hallucinate, people have weird shit that they attribute to religious experiences, and they have people. Some
But
people that say
we're explicitly talking about worldviews where there are gods that communicate with humans, and we're trying to evaluate which of those contradictory views are true. So obviously, people having
There's
religious
also
experiences with evidence.
I mean, I guess we can limit the discussion to that if you want.
Well, we
but
have to, because if we're not limiting it to that, then we're saying a priori that your view is false.
No, we're not. What?
Yes.
No. There's also all the agnostics, which I think is like 99% of the population. Like most people don't know whether or not there is a God of any property. Like we can't just limit it to the people who believe in a God that has the same properties as my God but is named differently or whatever. That's not There's way more people than that, and many of them do not have contradictory beliefs. But even if they did, we should consider those possibilities as well. Right?
Okay. So what I'm trying to say is that if we want to consider this in terms of like eliminating possibilities,
I don't really see how that's
we
like
can
a good
eliminate.
reasoning,
Let's say
to be
if the
honest.
Christian, sorry. Here's what I'm saying. The only thing I'm trying to say is like just to limit it to the Christian God. If the Christian God is real, then that eliminates all possibilities of gods that contradict the Christian God, right?
Correct.
And so, however, and presumably that applies to any sort of like exclusionary God that is said to like communicate, or really any exclusionary God at all.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you can say, well, there's a low probability of such a God existing, period. But however low that probability is, or however unreasonable it is to believe in that, then we're going to have to apply the same probability penalty to any particular deity you happen to believe in. And all I'm
Sure.
saying is that if there is a God, which the only sort of like the only probability space that Rainbow Dash can compete for is the probability space of universes that were created by gods. And I'm saying she's going to do a poor job of competing with other gods that would be more likely to exist based on
Yeah, I'm not
more
saying there's a good
consistent
reason
religious
to believe.
testimony.
I'm not saying there's a good reason for y'all to believe in Rainbow Dash. I'm saying that you guys don't have a good reason to disbelieve in Rainbow Dash.
Okay. And I'm saying probability is sufficient reason to disbelieve in something.
Well, I don't think you really believe that if you apply it to other things, right?
Well, what
Like
other thing would, like, what other thing?
like for example, I don't know. It's hard for me to hypothesize about a discovery that doesn't exist yet. But if we go back 500 years and we're talking about like whether or not electrons orbit atoms, like back in the day, they had alternative hypotheses for this, and it's perfectly reasonable to imagine that if sufficient people cared about this subject, that there would be many, many, many alternative hypotheses for what kinds of things are orbiting around atoms, or even if there are things that are orbiting around atoms at all. And if we just said, okay, right now we don't know anything about that, right? Back 500 years ago, we didn't know anything about that. All of these beliefs had equal probabilities of occurring. So um, each of those possibilities had a very, 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 very low probability of occurring because there were so many alternative hypotheses. But as it turned, so by your logic, we would conclude that all of those possibilities were false. But we can see in the future that one of those possibilities is true, right? Or at least, with it, if we assume that electrons actually orbit atoms, right? Then one of them actually is true. So we shouldn't be making this kind of probabilistic statement. It clearly is contradictory with reality if we apply it to other circumstances.
So what I think we would want to do is we would want to sort of provisionally say it was false because there's no reason to believe it. Let's say we're talking about something like some particular theory of atoms in a world or in a time period where we don't really have any observations of atoms. I'd be like, well, okay, yeah, if you want to make something up about atoms, I'd just say, yeah, that's false. And then if you, for some reason, like say you have intuition, you have like a theory, it could even be a divine revelation, you might have to think that there is some truth that you know about atoms. Then it would be on you to try to demonstrate that truth somehow in a way that's accessible to the rest of the world. And until you did that, yeah, I would say it's fine for them to say it's false. Like if we were literally just cavemen.
But it wasn't false, right?
No, sure. But if we were literally just cavemen walking around
Okay.
like on the
So
savannah,
you'll grant.
and then we said, you come up to me and say, hey, I think the Earth revolves around the sun, and I think every star on the sky is also a sun, and I think they all came out from this one big point that I'm going to
Okay.
call the Big Bang, and I think they form these big spirally things called like I just be like, okay, that's false. It would be completely justifiable to just say that's false. We would
Okay.
have,
So
in my opinion, good reason to believe it's false, even though it happened to be true. Just like how, let's say, if we're talking about flipping a coin 100 times, and then you want to say, oh, hey, Spaz, I think the coin is going to flip, or I think we're going to have this particular exact sequence of tails, tails, heads, 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 tails, tails, whatever, this exact sequence. Technically, for any sequence, it's possible that it could be true, but before it's happened, I think it's so improbable that we're just justified in saying it's false.
Okay, so you would agree, like before then. So let's say we're about to flip 100 coins, and somebody says like makes a claim about the sequence of coins. You say it's false. Would you agree at that point, at the same time that you're saying it's false, that it might be true, right?
Yes.
Okay,
But
so you're saying it's false.
in that case,
Wait,
might needs to be taken sort of like quantitatively as like
right.
1
So
over 2 to the power of 100.
right. So you're saying it's false, but it might be true, which is agnostic.
No, it's I have good reason to believe that it's false,
Yeah,
but
you
there's still some remaining probability mass for it being true.
it sure. I'm not really concerned with that kind of weird like definition of false where you say it's false but it might be true, right? I'm concerned about the
I'm not
definition where
saying it's
you like
false, but it might be true. I'm saying we have good reason to believe it's false, but it might be true, which is the case for any. Like even if say, I don't know, like you look out your window and you see somebody standing on the street, then there would always be some possibility that it's just like a cardboard cutout. But you would still say you have good reason to believe that there's a person standing there. So I think there's a point where the possibility of something being the case is just so small that we can say we have good reason to believe that it's true or false or whatever, even though we can't eliminate every possible contrary.
okay, so you would just like instead of so the whole thing a concept of agnosticism isn't really a thing for you then, right? Like you just say of all the things that we don't really have a conclusive true one sec. So you would say of all subjects which we do not have a conclusive like we're not sure that the truth value is true for that you can say it's false.
No, I'm saying whatever reason we have, like for any proposition, obviously you agree whatever reason we have to believe the contrary is good reason to believe that that proposition is false. So it's this whole logic only applies if you have something that contradicts other more likely
Yeah.
ideas. So if you want to say something like, I don't know, I know there's like a telephone pole outside my apartment, and then I could say, well, what if there's a crow sitting on that telephone pole? I'm agnostic about that, even though it's fairly unlikely, just because I don't have any reason to believe the contrary.
But there are contradictory possibilities, right?
Yeah,
There
but
are
I don't have any reason
infinitely
to.
contradictory possibilities.
Like if somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, Spaz, there is not a crow on the telephone pole outside your apartment," I would say, "Okay, sure, there's not one."
But my point is that there are infinitely many contradictory possibilities to the so you're agnostic about something and there are infinitely many contradictory possibilities and they're all equally possible like compared to the thing you're agnostic about. So according to your logic about Rainbow Dash, you should conclude that it is false that there is a bird outside your window.
Should I?
Yeah,
Well, no,
because
not necessarily, because I have reason to believe in some of the basic things that eliminate most of those infinitely many contrary possibilities. Like I have a reason to believe that I
no, there's
live.
still infinitely many possibilities that are within your realm of within all your beliefs. They're consistent with all your other beliefs.
I don't know if that's true, actually. I mean,
Yeah.
well, maybe like in the grand total of the universe, but like let's say I believe that I live on like a physical universe, and we're talking about like the square mile around where I live. Then there's only so many ways those atoms could be arranged, so it's not going to be infinite at all.
Okay. So, but again, when we're talking about the Rainbow Dash thing, we're saying like divide it by like 6 billion or something. So it's plenty to make it comparable.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, sure, sure.
Yeah. So what's the difference here? Why are you right? The
Oh,
logic seems to apply.
so the only difference is that in the Rainbow Dash thing, I have like actual contrary evidence, which is every religious.
No, you have
Every,
equal evidence, though, right? You have equal evidence.
So do you think that somebody claiming like divine revelation is no evidence to an outsider?
No, they have the same evidence as you do to believe in Rainbow Dash.
Okay, so the same on a 1-to-1 ratio, and then we're just multiplying it by 1,000,000,000. And so, well, we're multiplying it by 1,000,000,000 for each religion, just
Yeah.
for the sake of ease. And then we're saying the Rainbow Dash thing is like incredibly improbable, and that's good reason to believe it's false.
So there's like, let's say 7 billion roughly possible configurations of atoms relating to the bird being or not being on your outside your window. And you have equal reason to believe in any of those possibilities as you do to believe in the bird being outside your window. So you should believe that that's false as well. It makes the probability incredibly small.
Because some of those atom configurations are just multiple ways of describing the bird.
Yeah, but I'm talking about all the ones that do
Being
not.
a bird outside my window is probably just like, I don't know, 1 in a few hundred. Which
Yeah,
to
but
me,
there's also like many variations of the Rainbow Dash God that I've presented that aren't implicit in the statement, that are generalities of the things I've said. Like when I say it's a pony God, well, what constitutes a pony? Are we talking about a pony with 6 billion hairs or one with 5 billion hairs? Like that kind of thing.
Okay, sure, but I feel
This
like
kind of probabilistic analysis really doesn't work. Like we're counting like infinities and comparing them against each other and like pretending that like it doesn't work.
no. So I'm explicitly not talking about comparing or counting infinities. I'm explicitly talking about counting your religious testimony and comparing it to contradictory religious testimonies.
Yeah, but
And to me, it's fair to say either, or it's highly improbable that the only religious testimony in history that was correct would have been yours.
yeah, but it's also equally improbable that any of the other ones were correct, and the degree to which those ones are correct is the only degree to which you can say that this one is false.
I'm not really sure why, because
Well, that's the only argument you've given so
the
far.
Rainbow Dash hypothesis explicitly mentions a God that like communicates with people. So
Yeah.
it's technically like, at least in principle, it's going to be like falsifiable and everything. So
Well,
it's
yeah,
not like
if you
it's
can
a God
falsify
that
it, go ahead.
exists in a realm of infinite gods. It's a God that you're claiming to have some kind of personal experience with.
Yeah,
Which
and if
makes
you can
it
actually falsify it, then go ahead. But otherwise, if you're just going to say that it's improbable because there's a bunch of other contradictory gods, then you have to show some reason why those gods being existent is actually justifiable. Like why you believe that those gods do exist.
they're justifiable because the same reasons that we have for believing in those gods are reason, or they're justifiable because whatever reason there could be to believe that Rainbow Dash exists would
Yeah, I'm
also
not saying there is any good reason, and I believe that
Dash.
there is. I think it is unjustified for you guys to believe in Rainbow Dash. I also think consistently that it's unjustified for you to believe in any other gods, or even in God in general, in any general God that would disprove Rainbow Dash, that would contradict Rainbow Dash. So I don't think it's justified for you to believe that Rainbow Dash doesn't exist.
Okay. So do you think it's justified for you to believe that Rainbow Dash exists?
Yeah, because I have divine revelation about it.
And so if I put you into a reference class of other people who have divine revelation and say, well, it's interesting that that doesn't seem to be a particularly credible reference class.
Yeah, I'm
But
not saying it's credible. Right?
okay,
Whether or not I have a
it's
belief about,
credible to you.
like, whether or
I'm
not
asking
it's just
whether it's credible
like
to you.
yeah, like whether or not it's justified for me to believe in Rainbow Dash is besides the point. The whole argument is about whether or not it's justified for other people to believe that Rainbow Dash doesn't exist, and by extension, or like therefore, whether or not they're justified in believing in other gods. It has nothing to do with my beliefs. Like it's a tangent.
Okay. Well, the only thing I'm saying is I think it's probable to disbelieve in one particular member of a particular reference class because it seems to be less credible than other members of that reference class where they're mutually contradictory.
Yeah, I just don't think, but I don't think that any of the. All right, so we're going around in circles. So let's cut it off.
I guess that's fair. We can go
Let's
ahead
cut it
and
off.
do the
So
debate.
I'll just give my closing statement. And so the only argument that's been presented that is supposed to be evidence for the non-existence of Rainbow Dash, the pony god, is that of course, logically, if there were some contradictory God that did exist, then Rainbow Dash would not exist. And so, whatever degree of justification we have for believing that another God exists is equal. We have equal justification for believing that Rainbow Dash does not exist. My contention is that there is no reason to believe in any other God or in God in general, except for perhaps for me, the divine prophet, but that's besides the point. So therefore, we have no reason to believe that Rainbow Dash does not exist. The only argument that's been presented, and I do not think it holds up.
Okay, cool. So my position is, I think having a sufficiently low probability of something is good enough reason to say it doesn't exist. I think we can justify saying that the Rainbow Dash God doesn't exist because it exists in a reference class of, if you consider it one way, you could say of infinitely many equally probable gods, or if you could say a reference class of other gods that just have more weight, more likelihood of being the true God than Rainbow Dash does. And obviously, each of those gods, any reason we have for Rainbow Dash doesn't exist. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for the debate.